Welcome to the EchoCast, the podcast about video game news, speculation, reviews, whatever else I feel like covering. I am your host, Bon, and this week I'll be talking about the PlayStation Showcase, Embracer Group takes a financial hit, Golem's bad reviews, and much more. A few things before we get started. Subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast platform, and on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and comment with your thoughts, questions for next week, or to just say hello. A big thank you to supporter level patrons PK, The Dawn, Cage Nephilim, and Neuronix, as well as a producer level thank you to Hassan. If you're interested in supporting this podcast and getting ad-free episodes for as little as $1 per month, please check out patreon.com/BonDiesel. Gaming news. This week we have 12 topics. Quite a few. Topic number 1, the PlayStation Showcase and my thoughts. So I streamed most of this. It was kind of a weird situation, and I actually will not be uploading that stream. It can get weird on YouTube with doing that stuff. I did do like a summary, so if you want to check out on YouTube my thoughts on the whole show, you can. Just the highlights I wanted to talk about was Spider-Man 2. Obviously, I have more to say about that though, but it looked really good, looked fun, looked like more Spider-Man, which the first game is one of the more heralded games of the recent gen, and this one seems like it's going to be another big deal because it's a sequel to that game. So looked like mostly good stuff. Metal Gear Solid 3 remake, that one's gotten some mixed reviews because this is a remake being done by, I think it's Virtuous is the studio, along with Konami, but obviously no Kojima. And so I've seen some mixed takes on this. I've seen some people be like, well, it's supposed to be a 1-to-1 remake, so in theory, and they're bringing back all the voice actors and all of that to redo their lines, in theory it should be fine. But will it be missing the magic, right? I think that's what a lot of people are wondering about. And I don't know. I think they can do it. I'm sure the Resident Evil 4 remake had different people on it. I'm sure, all these Mass Effect Legendary Edition, all these games that have been remade or remastered, I doubt too many of them had all of their original devs, and so I think it can be fine. But we'll have to wait and see. That is coming along with a volume 1 where it's going to be Metal Gear Solid 1, 2, and 3, so they can work on the new systems. And that suggests they may do a volume 2 that may include Metal Gear Solid 4. I didn't know this, but I believe short of having a Metal Gear Solid 4 disc, you can't play that game right now. I didn't know that. I just assumed you could download it, but apparently you can't. So there's a lot of excitement about 4 just because it would make it easy to play again. So we'll have to wait and see. And that's going to be multi-platform, which was surprising. We'll talk about that. Most of the big hitters, in my opinion, of this show were multi-platform games, which is not what you expect from what you would assume would be a first-party showcase, but we'll get into that. Assassin's Creed Mirage was shown. I thought that looked really good. There's been all this talk that this was it was originally a DLC for Valhalla, and they have turned it into its own game. And not only did they do that, but supposedly, and they've claimed, and it looked like it in this trailer, they're trying to go back to kind of a more old school Mass Effect, Assassin's Creed feel, and it looked the part. We'll have to wait and see, but I'm excited. I want to see a modern take on Assassin's Creed with the old school stuff, but the new school graphics and all of that. So very excited for that. Alan Wake 2 showed and looked really good. I was really impressed by that. I thought that the idea of you playing as a different character, or maybe Alan Wake is going to be kind of a enigma or a presence rather than the main character is fine. The graphics looked amazing. The presentation was great for this. There was some controversy about this game because apparently it's going to be digital only, which I didn't know that the, not Alan Wake 1, but its big DLC was also digital only. So this is not that big of a change for them. But there's kind of a thought of the printing discs just costs a lot of money. And their whole reasoning is they feel like they can make the game $10 cheaper on the platforms due to not having physical. So we'll see if they pull back on that. Bungie's new game, Marathon, was shown. This is technically a reboot of a really old franchise. It doesn't really seem like it has much to do with the old franchise, but still, it's got some lineage there that they're playing off of. It's going to be a extraction shooter. We're gonna the weekly topic is about those types of games, so we'll talk more about that. But the aesthetic was it was a CGI trailer, but the aesthetic that they're going for, at least that they're promoting right now, looks insane. Looks like so good, so unbelievably good. Now, the problem with that is that if you remember all of the concept art and all of the pre-release, maybe marketing, but at least the way the game was portrayed, Destiny, before release, was way different than what we got. Like, drastically different. Like, so different, I'm surprised people don't still mention it different. Now, Destiny has gone on to be very successful with 2 games. So obviously it found its audience and people enjoy it and it's fine. But I'm one of those people who still remembers what it seemed like we were getting and really would have preferred that over what we got. But I'm one of few, it appears. The final bit was they announced their Project Q, which is a streaming tablet specifically for the PlayStation, as well as some Sony PlayStation branded earbuds. I'm sure those will be fine. They'll be $50 more expensive than they should be. But if you want brand synergy, I'm sure the earbuds are fine. The tablet streaming thing is interesting because it's literally, they took a DualSense controller, cut it in half, and attached it to the back of an 8-inch tablet. It's remote play, so it won't play any games on its own. It will not play anything. It's going to be probably a pretty underpowered tablet, and the whole point is that it uses an app to interface with your PlayStation and it streams games from that. It's the same thing that you can do on your phone with PlayStation and Xbox right now, and it's fine, but I suspect the kicker is going to be the cost. I bet I've seen people be like, "Oh, I bet it's going to be like under $100." What company do you think you are dealing with? Sony, especially PlayStation, is not going to give you a deal. They're going to charge $250 for that thing. At least that's my prediction. So we'll see. And people will pay it. Some will. I don't think it's going to be a very popular product. I think if it could play its own games, if it could function independently, I could see it being very popular, but I just don't like its main use will be inside your own home. Say you have your PlayStation 5 hooked up to your TV and you want to be able to play it when, someone else is watching the TV. I'm like, okay, but like, is it really worth $250 or, maybe less, maybe more? It was especially funny because just a few days before, I believe it was Backbone released their PlayStation 5, branded, official controllers that you hook up with a phone to do the remote play through an app on your phone. One of my favorite parts about that, just because as an Xbox fan, is that on the PlayStation Backbone, it had the Xbox layout of the sticks. I would have figured for sure PlayStation would be like, you can't put us, we can't be on that branding unless you have our stick layout. But I assume that's like a standard for Backbone, and they just were probably would have been like, okay, well, we just won't do it because we aren't going to retool our entire line for a controller change, especially when it's already perfect. But yeah, so my thoughts on this whole show. I mean, if you watched the recap or if you were hanging out on the stream with me, it was interesting because there were a lot of cool games shown. The problem is that Sony and PlayStation have had a reputation that the state of plays tend to be this kind of show. Lots of third-party stuff, lots of multi-plat stuff, with maybe a sprinkling of first-party excitement. But the showcases have typically been pretty heavy on the first party, on the exclusive, on the big bangers. And this was basically a glorified state of play from my perspective. Spider-Man 2 looked fine. I've seen a lot of people glowing over that, and it seems like people, maybe and maybe not, maybe I'm just a hater, kind of trying to like make up for like how kind of rough the show was. And that I thought the Spider-Man 2 gameplay, I thought the gameplay looked fine. It seems like it's very like plays itself in a lot of ways, and I kind of felt like the first game seemed like that too. But people love it, so whether that's true or not, it doesn't matter. I thought the graphics looked awful. I attributed it possibly to, it's a 6,000 kilobit stream. It's only 1080p. It's compressed. It's, maybe all those things are why it didn't look too stunning. But then I went back and I did watch like the high def, you can find that gameplay segment in high, in 1440p, 4K. And I watched it again, and I don't think it looks that good. It obviously like looks good, and like it looks like it's gonna be fun. If you like the first game, it looks like this is gonna be a ballpark home run. But like a discerning eye, like when they did close-ups on the suits, like they looked awful. Like they looked really bad. And maybe not necessarily like objectively bad, but like this game is next gen or current gen only. And so the whole idea, in theory, is that if you don't have to continue servicing the last gen systems, you should be able to bump up the base quality. And I really felt like, especially in the close-ups, the texture work, like on the main characters, like it's one thing if in this big giant open world game, if some of the background stuff it isn't perfect, who cares? But like typically your main characters will look like really good. Especially in cutscenes where they can allocate more of the power to having more complicated textures and stuff just for that cutscene. And I thought the cutscenes looked kind of terrible. It was really interesting. I haven't seen a lot of other people saying that. And I'm definitely, well, and I also don't pay attention to all of the console war gamers and all that. So I'm sure maybe someone's mentioned it, but I don't doubt the game's still going to be amazing. It obviously will be. It just, to me, was just weird. It seemed odd to me that a game that is supposed to be this big jump forward kind of looks like it. Like, I'm surprised it's not on the last gen systems. I'm sure it's got systems going and stuff that maybe the last gen couldn't do it, or maybe they've just decided to move on. Either way, maybe this game was like designed at one point to be cross-platform or cross-generation, but I don't know. Either way, that game is going to sell 15, 20 million copies, and Sony will be laughing to the bank at my, I'm sure my opinion is no more respected than Puddlegate with the first game. So, and then the last bit I do want to talk about is that Sony did have a quippy response after this was over, and they had a graphic that they posted of all of the games from the showcase that will also be on Xbox. And it was most of the big ones, and it included like Mirage or Marathon, the Bungie game, which the impression I'm under is that Sony did acquire Bungie, but I believe they're owned by Sony, not by the PlayStation division, and that Bungie is still self-publishing. It was a big agreement that they would still be multi-platform, and so it's one of those things where they like aren't maybe technically a PlayStation first party studio because they're actually like owned that they don't technically own it directly, but they're obviously going to work together. Like the Destiny just had some skins come out where you could dress up as some various PlayStation characters. Like they're going to have cross pollination there, but it kind of seems like, I don't know, it was interesting. The Xbox clapback was well, to me, I just was like, oh, okay, they're just they're obviously being a little like snapping, but really they just posted the graphic being like, hey, those are some great looking games, and it showed all the ones that will be on Xbox. People took it as like, oh, Xbox better have the best show they've ever had if they're gonna clap back like that. I'm like, I guess, but like, it wasn't like they said like, well, our show's gonna have 10 first party exclusives unlike the other one. Like they didn't just if it was that blatant, then maybe it would call for some anger, but I thought it was fine. But maybe I'm biased. But overall the show was okay. I thought, as an Xbox fan, I loved it because all the good games they showed, that for the most part will be on Xbox. So I got to see some new stuff I'm excited about now. If I was a PlayStation diehard, especially someone who cares about like the console war, I'd be pretty upset. A lot of people were hoping this would be the big showcase to be like, okay, here's what's coming in the next 2 or 3 years. And they would show like Wolverine and the next Naughty Dog project and the next Santa Monica, and the next, all these different things. And they didn't, they really barely showed anything. They showed the Bungie stuff, including some Destiny 2 DLC, Spider-Man 2, and a couple like Concord, I think was one. And I feel like there was one more project, but it was like kind of not super exciting. It was really interesting. Do I think that like Xbox is going to have, this amazing show that's going to overshadow it? I expect the Xbox show to be better. I think we're going to see more than a couple first party games. At least, even if it's fairly vague updates on Hellblade 2, on State of Decay 3, on Forspoken, on I think we'll see something. I think we'll obviously see a pretty big blowout with Starfield having its own showcase, Forza Motorsport probably having a good segment. I think they actually confirmed that today, and I think we'll see some other stuff. It's not like I think people are gonna sell their PlayStations and go buy Series X's because of that. I mean, at the end of the day, I remember I saw some weird commentary today of people being like, well, Xbox doesn't have very good showcases either. And like, that's like objectively false. Xbox has amazing showcases. They almost always do. They just never deliver on them. like they rarely, and sometimes never, like fully deliver on the games that they tease and all of that. They often, as we've seen in the last year, basically almost nothing comes out. And what does with Redfall isn't great, or it's a surprise like Hi-Fi Rush, which in hindsight probably should have been treated like a traditional full release, and they could have charged $60 for that. And I think it would have like more prestige and probably would have sold better to more people, but we'll see. We also have the Ubisoft show coming up, as well as the Summer Game Fest. So the last bit about this is I've seen people proposing, well, actually, I think Sony was holding back and they're going to show stuff at Summer Game Fest or at another showcase later this year. They aren't that genius. Like this kind of stuff affects like stock prices and stuff like that. They wouldn't intentionally shoot themselves in the foot. Like I saw people be like, well, they're going to see what Xbox has and then do their real show. It's like, guys, come on. Like, I think what we're finding is that there's a really good chance that after Spider-Man 2, they just are going to be maybe in a weird cycle where they don't have anything really exciting for like a year or a year and a half. They'll have third-party deals. They'll have third-party exclusives. They'll do some stuff that people will be excited for. I have no doubt. PlayStation will be fine, but I wouldn't be surprised at all if we don't see, because I've seen people be like, well, Wolverine will be out fairly soon. It's like, I don't know how big Insomniac is, and maybe they are big enough to have 2 full AAA scaled development teams. So maybe they are going whole hog on Wolverine right now. Probably not. they're probably going whole hog on Spider-Man 2 right now, which doesn't even have a date, but should come out later this year. And they will probably shift a lot of that over to Wolverine once Spider-Man 2 comes out. But if that doesn't happen until this fall, I doubt Wolverine's going to be done in a year. And so I saw people being like, oh yeah, well, Wolverine's going to come out in 2024. I'm like, I mean, maybe, but like, probably not. And then a bunch of other stuff. Like, again, we don't know what Santa Monica is doing. I'll talk about some Naughty Dog stuff in a little bit where their stuff could be a little rocky. It's going to be an interesting year for PlayStation. And I think, I guess Xbox kind of has an opportunity here to kind of be like, hey, actually things are going okay over here. Just forget about Redfall, like we'll see. Either way, I think PlayStation fans will be happy at the end of the year. I think Xbox fans will be happy at the end of the year. And hopefully people have both and they'll all be happy. That's my goal. Story number 2. A report came out saying that Ubisoft Star Wars game could be coming out sooner than we think, and it could be as soon as March 2024. So I believe it was last week or maybe the week before, I talked about how Ubisoft put out all of their expected games for the rest of the fiscal year, which for them goes until the end of March of next year, 2024. And one of the ones listed was an unannounced game or a big release that we don't know and that we haven't heard of yet, like a release date at least. And so now the rumors are going pretty hard into that being the Star Wars game from Ubisoft Massive. I was wondering if maybe this was The Division Heartland for reasons, but it might not be. It seems like the general feeling now that this might be Star Wars. I may or may not have reached out to try to find some stuff out about this, and people's lips were sealed shut because you don't F with Disney. So I think this is pretty possible, pretty likely even, and I hope it's true. I want to play this game by less than a year from now. It's pretty cool that it seems like so far no major details of that game have leaked, like basically at all. No gameplay, nothing like that. Like everyone is assuming it's going to be The Division and Star Wars, and maybe it will be, and that would be super cool to me. But I suspect it's going to be more than that. And so, hopefully they can keep it all under wraps until they purposefully show us. It could be as soon as the Ubisoft Forward. We'll have to wait and see. If it is coming this fiscal year, you would think that we'll see something. But we'll have to wait and see. But this would be very exciting for me. I think Ubisoft Massive is probably Ubisoft's best studio. I'm a little biased. But I really am excited to see them hopefully get a chance to flex their development muscles on something that isn't The Division. Story number 3, Naughty Dog delays, quote unquote, their games as a service and cuts staff and scope on that project. So there's this whole factions game, this factions mode that everyone was expecting after The Last of Us 2, because The Last of Us 1 had a multiplayer mode. And what happened was, I think it was last year where they said like, hey, we are working on something, but it's bigger in scope than just a little PvP mode. So we're going to take some time. And then today they put out a letter, which was common today, unfortunately, basically saying like, hey, we're taking our time on that project. We're not showing it yet. We know you wanted to see it. Sorry, our bad. And then Jason Schreier very quickly afterwards put out an article talking about like that he's hearing that they're cutting back on staff for that project and the scope of it. So I saw people thinking that this was going to be like a Division game in the Last of Us universe, which could be really cool. I've talked a lot about how I would love to see the Division game in the style of The Last of Us, just that gritty, realistic, kind of personal thing. And so I guess if they do the opposite, that could have been cool. The thoughts on this are interesting. I've seen a lot of people I trust being like, oh, they're going to shut that project down. Like, that's not what it says. That's not what Jason Schreier's article necessarily says. It's not what their letter said, their official one. But it does seem a little bit like a writing on the wall thing, because if it is this big ambitious project and they are cracking away at it, you know, you're not going to take away people and take away the scope. That's them being like, okay, that's too much. Let's pare this thing down to some essentials and let's get it out, because maybe that's not what we're going for. A big thing I've talked about, and I think we may have seen the results of it in that PlayStation showcase, is that games as a service are not just hard, they're impossible to make. They're just impossible. And the reason I say that is because they're the one studio, maybe two, maybe Digital Extremes, but Bungie makes the best quote unquote games as a service in, like, you know, in that sense, with Destiny 2. And even though it's probably the best one, obviously everyone has personal opinions, but if you had to look at the big picture and you had to pick, like, what's the best games as a service or looter shooter or whatever, like, I would pick The Division, but I think most people would pick Destiny. And despite that, they still screw it up all the time. Like, Destiny 2 is probably the best game in its genre, but it's not perfect, and it is far from it. And so it's one of those things where I think I still don't think a single live service game has really been nailed right. And so, you know that we've seen examples of that. And then we see that Sony says, hey, we're actually working on 10 games as a service games. And even though those won't all be like Marathon or The Division or like Destiny, they will still require that kind of work if they are truly a live service game. And people just don't realize that live service games, even Bungie, can't keep up with demand, because you have large contingents of your population, of your players, who just burn through content extremely quickly, and they tend to be the loudest ones too, even if they don't make up the majority. And so I wonder if this whole show and the fact that it felt a little lackluster is a direct result of them having to invest way more resources into these games as a service games across all their studios, where before they really focused on single player, third person, action adventure games, which are extremely hard to make, especially at the fidelity and complexity that Naughty Dog and the PlayStation studios do. But you take that, we also heard today that Naughty Dog is working on a single player new experience. Most people are taking that as The Last of Us 3, could be something else. But if they are working on something like that and doing it the way that they do, then the resources taken away by a games as a service would be detrimental to that. And so maybe that's the reason, we didn't see things from some of these studios, is because they are working on those things that everyone wants to see, but they're also having resources and time sucked away by these live service games, where either they're working on them between studios, or there is a studio that's doing like a single player game and a games as a service, like Naughty Dog. I really think we're going to see the impact of, we're going to see how just devastating these games as a service can be on a developer and publisher. I don't think people realize how demanding they are. And I think that we're going to see the results of it with how things are going with PlayStation. PlayStation is going to be fine. PlayStation is more than happy to cut projects if they aren't going to work out. So I suspect that them, more so than a lot of publishers, will not allow it to drag them down too much. But I think that they will at least a decent amount see where it's going and then maybe make some choices. But yeah, I think we're going to see just how good PlayStation's management is of their studios, because it's going to be hard on everyone to get these 10 live service games to market and to support them properly, which so far I would argue that no one ever has. Story number 4. Yoshida explains why Final Fantasy 16 is a Sony exclusive. This article was really funny because it talked a lot about how only worrying about one platform makes it easier to optimize, even though all the talk in the previews about this game is that it's not very well optimized. Just throwing it out there. This comes out very soon. And all of this stuff and their relationship with Sony and stuff. And I made a tweet where I quote tweeted it and was just like, I wish they were just allowed to say, oh, they back, Sony just gives us all the money. They just give us so much money to only put it on their system. And it's just that simple. Like, yeah, sure, there is like the history between Sony and Final Fantasy. Sure, maybe it is easier to develop for one platform, even though, again, it sounds like it's not actually that didn't work. But who's to say? It's the money. They Square Enix could refuse that money and put out 16 on Xbox and on PlayStation, and they would probably lose money if they're negotiating that deal right. They are saying, sure, Sony, we'll take your money because either for development or just for salaries and bonuses or whatever. Yeah, we'll take your money, and we acknowledge we're going to lose some money from Xbox, but you're giving us so much that it's worth it. Because it's kind of a double-sided sword, though, because a big argument that you've seen with various Japanese studios and games that are very, more focused on that audience is that they never sell well on Xbox when they have been on there. The problem with that argument is that if they're never on there, you never build an audience. And so, of course, they sell bad when the occasional JRPG does get released on Xbox, because all the best ones aren't. And so it's an interesting thing. I appreciated that they're trying to be like, yeah, here's all the reasons that we are exclusive to PlayStation, when I wish we lived in a world where they could just be like, oh, they pay us a ton of money. Like, they just give us all the money to do this. But it is what it is. Story number 5. This is a fairly quick one, but an interesting one. The Embracer Group, the publisher based out of Sweden, announced that they had a $2 billion funding bill or funding deal fall through that they'd been negotiating for over 6 months. And what was really interesting about this is that not only the initial reaction was like, oh man, they were going to use all that money to try to fund new projects. And if someone wants to correct me, I won't pretend like I can't remember. I didn't write it down, but I believe they said something like 70% of the money or something was already allocated to paying for existing projects. And the worrying part about that is that means that money is not happening anymore. And then that means that all those projects that were expecting that money to help them finish development, where's that money coming from now? This was an interesting announcement because they didn't just release it in the press release. They did it live with the CEO, and that man was just purely defeated. Like, if you thought that Phil Spencer on the Kinda Funny Xcast was like a defeated, grumpy man, you should see this Embracer Group presentation. It is rough. It is not good. That you can tell that deal must have just fallen through, and they are still dealing with it. If you don't know the Embracer Group, I don't know. I should have looked it up, but they own a hilarious number of studios as a publisher, like dozens and dozens of studios, and they own tons of IP. They have like all of the tools to be a legitimate huge publisher. And they just don't release anything. Like this Gollum game, which we're going to talk about, is one of their kind of highlights this year, and it's very bad. And so it's one of those things where they probably needed this $2 billion because they've had a bunch of these studios forever, and they haven't, as far as I know, done almost anything with them. And so this was interesting. If Embracer Group fell apart, it would be kind of a fire sale, I guess, of PlayStations and Xboxes and probably EA and maybe even Ubisoft and a bunch of these, 2K and all these big publishers of probably sniping up and swooping up a bunch of really great IP and stuff. and studios, some really good studios. So I'm definitely interested to see what happens with this, and I will certainly be following it. Story number 6, a really short one. Microsoft has formally appealed the CMA ruling that blocked their Activision Blizzard King acquisition. The focus of the appeal appears to be them saying, like, the CMA basically denied our whole thing because of cloud gaming. And here's all the reasons why that, one, it's, cloud gaming is such a minuscule part of the current gaming world. And two, why they probably won't necessarily dominate it because other people are making moves in that area and stuff like that. So I believe, if I remember correctly, only like 40% of appeals, like go through, and are successful. And I believe that even if the appeal goes through, it's not like the deal, like the acquisition happens. The acquisition judgment goes back to the same board that already denied it, and they have to re-evaluate the deal, I believe accepting or acknowledging the results of the appeal if it gets approved. Or the appeal may not happen, it may not work, and it's just dead in the water still. There's a lot of talk that Xbox could still finish the deal, and there's just going to be some weirdness about how the companies get treated in the CMA covered market, which is mostly Britain, the United Kingdom, essentially. And it would be weird. It would be interesting. Like, in theory, Activision, ABK, and Xbox would have to just behave as separate companies in that one country, and then everywhere else they could behave as one. Definitely an interesting one. I'm very curious to see how that plays out. I've really seen the attitude in the last couple of weeks really turn towards this still going through, and that the CMA may change their mind, because basically I believe that literally every other jurisdiction has approved the deal, even China and a few others that were holding out. I don't think the United States has approved it yet, but it's kind of a similar situation where it's that they're kind of putting up resistance because they have to, because the person who's in charge of that review board is kind of taking a hard line on this stuff, but people don't think that the United States is going to be an issue. So we'll have to wait and see. Okay, topic number 7 is actually our weekly topic, and it's going back and talking to the idea of, are extraction games the next big trend? So over the last few years, we see different trends happen. We saw open world games get really popular in the late 2000s, and Ubisoft kind of did that to us. And then more recently, we saw like battle royales get really popular. We saw the PUBG get big. We saw Fortnite. We saw a bunch of these games at Warzone, doing that thing. A little fun fact is that in a lot of ways, the Division 1 had a DLC called Survival. And if you ever go back, it basically was one of, but probably the most mainstream, one of the first, not only battle royales, because it kind of was, that's the thing, it was very loosely a BR, but it was also loosely an extraction shooter at the same time. And both of those trends have happened since that came out. Survival, if you talk to a Division community member, you would think that it was the most popular thing ever. The truth is that beyond like the first week it came out, and then like this 1 week they did a free trial of it, you could like never find full lobbies and stuff unless you were like right at the right time. So it really wasn't as popular as kind of the cult, the cult fans would have you believe, but it was still really cool. And, so we saw BRs get really big, and now it seems like the trend is going towards extraction games, which was kind of like a natural evolution of the BR franchise or the genre. And what we've seen is that like Escape from Tarkov, as far as I know, was one of the first like high profile extraction games where it's not just one person wins. You know, in theory, 20 people can spawn on a map, and if everything goes right for them, all 20 can extract. Now, you know, they have to contend with each other. There is a PvP element. There are AI. You know, there are tasks that you're completing and things that you're doing. And so the big difference, if you don't know, a BR is typically set up where one person or one team are the only people who can leave the map. Are they? You have to. That's how you win. You become the last one. Or the difference being with extraction shooters is you can go kill everyone if you want, or if you want to try, or you can just get from where you start to where you're supposed to get out and be quiet and mind your business. And you don't have to participate in PvP and things like that. Even PvE if you don't want to, if you're very sneaky. And that's becoming big. So Tarkov was kind of the big one. Of course, I can't remember it off the top of my head. You know, a couple years ago, there was another one that came out that was like a more casual version of that, and now we're seeing a whole bunch of it. The big ones being the Naughty Dog, the Last of Us game was, you know, people were starting to think it was going to be an extraction shooter. The Division, if we go back to that, the Dark Zone mode is very much an extraction mode. If we go to, there's rumors that Heartland is an extraction game, the new Division spin-off or whatever you want to call it. We have Marathon from Bungie, which we just saw announced, and it's going to be an extraction game. And so, is that the next trend? And I think it obviously is. And one of the failings of that is actually Battlefield 2042. When that game came out, it just didn't seem like it was meant to be a Battlefield classic experience. But it had this hazard mode, I think that's what it was called, that was an extraction mode. But like, it wasn't finished. And at least for me, like, I put together the pieces of like, oh, Battlefield was trying to make an extraction game, probably realized way too late in the game that it was not good or not worth it. And then they tried to pivot and be like, oh, no, it's still Battlefield, but we just have this mode if you want to. And what ended up happening is the classic Battlefield mode and that extraction mode both came out unfinished. As far as I know, they haven't really touched the extraction mode since 2042 came out. They have improved the regular game a ton, and even more is coming. That's a different story. But it's really interesting because they both fall under the like battle royale thing. You know, battle royales are typically games as a service. They have seasons and they have battle passes and all that, and so do extraction games. That's very common. We've seen it multiple times already. And so it isn't like a big revolutionary change, but it absolutely, in my opinion, is the next big trend, at least the more a noticeable one. What's interesting about it is that all of the ones I've mentioned aren't trying to do like a realistic thing, except Tarkov, and that's where that game still definitely has its hold on an audience, where it's a bigger game than you think it is. And it's also the only one that's tried to do it like quote unquote realistically. All of these other extraction games, even the Division to a point, are pretty stylized, are not very gritty, are fairly, or at least trying to be somewhat approachable and stuff. And Tarkov has at least mostly stayed with the whole idea of like, this is a hardcore game, we're going to keep it hardcore. Now that's definitely changed. They've definitely lightened up, at least in my opinion. But yeah, I think we'll see the existing BRs that found success with like Apex, Warzone, Fortnite, you know, all the big ones will obviously stick around. PUBG even to this day. But I really think you won't see too many of those coming out new. I think you're gonna see a lot more extraction shooters over the next couple of years, and I think any of them that come out past like this year are probably too late. I really think that there is an audience that really wants to get one that is as close to Tarkov as possible, but is way more approachable, because that game is not approachable for lots of reasons. The gameplay design, the devs, the studio, for various reasons, are just kind of not super fun to be associated with and to give your money to. The community is, it has some great people in it and some good moments, but that community is rough for various reasons, which I won't get into today. But yeah, I definitely think we see a bunch more of these extraction games, and I'm excited to see if any of them can really hit it. Story number 8, Ubisoft's Prince of Persia game has been rebooted again. So a year or two ago, they announced that the reboot or the remake of the Prince of Persia game, it was being done by a third-party studio. They showed gameplay and it was atrocious. I think it was an Ubisoft forward. And it seems like that reaction led them to give the game back to the original studio. I think it's Ubisoft Montreal. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And we haven't heard much since then. And then we get this, this information that it's like, oh, it's because they took what they got from that third-party studio. Probably were like, nope, this is awful. We are not even going to try to fix this. And they're just doing it on their own. And so they've said that they're in the conceptual phase. So the fact that we saw what we saw of that footage a few years ago, if they're in the concept stage at this point, I would assume that they completely scrapped the old remake and they're just doing their own, which will probably be a good thing in the long run. But it definitely makes that whole saga even crazier. And it even, like, if you think about all of the talk about like Beyond Good and Evil 2 and how that game has been in development, quote unquote, for 10 years, and it seems like it's nowhere close to being released. It's that same idea where it's a believe it when I see it situation. Okay, a few reviews, or at least like talking about reviews. Story number 9, Planet of Lana. So I played this and beat it over the weekend, or during this week, I guess. And it was friggin-tastic. It's a side-scroller puzzle game. It's a very artsy-fartsy, very emotional, at least in moments. Very, very cool game. Even just for the visuals, it's cool. The puzzles are never like impossible to figure out, but they're fun. The story that's told in kind of a unique way is so good. And this game, this Planet of Lana, just has two moments that are meant to be these big cinematic moments. And man, they are just so good. Like, it's just hard to explain how good this game is. The fact that it has a Metacritic score of 82 is insane to me. I'm assuming a decent number of reviewers gave it lower scores for not being hard enough. I guess maybe not being long enough. I mean, I think it took me 7, 8, 9 hours to beat, maybe 10. It was longer than I expected. It's a real shame this isn't at least like an 85 or up. Like, if it was up to me, I would give it a 9 out of 10. The Planet of Lana was just a joy to play. Just so good. If you have Game Pass, it's on there. So please at least try it on Game Pass. I believe it's only like $30 if you buy it on its own, either on Xbox or on PC. Play Planet of Lana. Excellent, insanely good game. And then we have story number 10. We have the Golem game and its Metacritic score of 36. It's rare that games that get a decent amount of reviews these days can even be that bad. Because if you remember, just a few weeks ago, Redfall came out and I think has a Metacritic of like 64 or something. And that was like the biggest disaster that Xbox has ever experienced, or at least that's how it was portrayed. And now you look at that and, the Golem dev team would kill for that score. Now, it didn't help that it's part of a huge franchise. We saw the Harry Potter game, Hogwarts, come out and be like a pretty good game, but probably because of its IP, especially unfortunately other stuff as well, sold like hotcakes, did extremely well, being a pretty good game with a insanely popular license attached to it. And what happened here is that you have what appears to be a legitimately bad, terrible game with a super popular license attached to it. And you know what's sad is that no matter if I suggest checking out reviews and stuff for this, it legitimately seems as bad as the reviews are. And what's so crazy about it is that because it's attached to that big IP, they're gonna sell probably 60% more copies than they should, because a bunch of people who don't read reviews and don't care about pundits and critics and journalists and gaming are just going to see Gollum, Lord of the Rings. Oh, I like those books. I like those movies. I'm going to buy that. And they're going to play it. And some people will probably be fine with it. But yeah, that game, it's going to sell better than it should purely off its name. And one of the craziest things is that apparently the development team already had been greenlit for another Lord of the Rings game that's like fully funded. There was some, it's tough. Like, you saw the development team put out this like apology letter for the state of the game. One of the issues with it though is that it's a little bit like Redfall, but it doesn't seem like it's nearly as, it seems like it's way worse. In that they kind of portrayed it as being like, hey, we're dedicated to fixing the issues with this game and all that. And there are glitches and bugs. It doesn't run well, the Gollum game. But the main issue is that it seems like it's like systematically at its core a bad game. And so it won't matter how much they do to try to patch it up and stuff. It's just never going to be a good game. And I saw some devs from that studio, their individual accounts, and it was pretty, it was pretty bad. It was kind of sad. And so my whole thing is don't attack the devs, don't go after individuals. They did their best. These bad games are never one person's fault. They just, the right people don't see these things at the right times, or they just don't care, and the people doing the hard work just do the best they can, and they make the models as good as they can, and the animations and the voice acting and the environments, they just do what they can, and then they try to be proud of what they did. So it's pretty bad though. I suggest checking out the gameplay. Some of the videos, it's pretty awful, like from top to bottom. It's crazy. Story number 11 is just a super quick one. Cassette Beast came out on Game Pass, so I downloaded it and checked it out. It's essentially a alternative take on like a Pokemon game. It's very similar to Pokemon. It does have some twist, the way things work, but that's what it is. I just want to point out that I've only played it for like an hour, and so I want to play more before I do like a review. But it has a amazing soundtrack, and so if you just like music, I highly suggest going and checking out that game. And I believe that you can find the whole soundtrack on YouTube. So maybe you don't care about the game, I suggest checking out the soundtrack. It is fantastic. And finally, story number 12, some content updates. I have accepted an offer into the Ubisoft Creator Program. The truth is, I actually, the stats on my content aren't high enough actually for their, for them to typically take me. But if you do or don't know, back in 2018, 5 years ago now, I was named an Ubisoft Star Player. And a lot of the star players who make content were invited automatically into this program. It basically just gives us some early access and some perks to participate in campaigns and stuff with Ubisoft. to be straight up, it won't affect my desire or willingness to criticize Ubisoft or congratulate them or whatever. It just hopefully will bring some cool opportunities to show you all some stuff, maybe exclusively or early, and be on the lookout for that. I don't even have this in my notes. I only saw it when I logged in today. I got approved, and if I got approved, a lot of people probably did. But I'll be able to, I'm like an approved streamer for Diablo 4 and its release. And so I fully plan on playing that game a ton, including on stream. And I'm excited. It looks like there's a bunch of perks and stuff I can provide by being accepted into that. I will probably make another video to explain that whole thing, or at least some kind of Twitter post or something like that. So be on the lookout. If you are going to be playing Diablo 4, it looks like you'll be able to get some cool stuff if you check out my content, especially on Twitch of that game, twitch.tv/BonDiesel. Okay, so that's all the stories. Let's jump into listener questions. If you have your own question, topic, or story, be sure to ask in the Discord and the YouTube comments. You can hit me up on Twitter at BonDiesel or at the EchoCast. And I just started, and I put up a Google form where you can submit questions, topics, or stories on there for me to cover. So, links to all of that stuff should be down in the description or over on my Twitter or in the Discord. So please check those places out if you want to be part of the show. We had actually quite a number of questions come through the Google form. I picked 2 to go after. I'll either cover the other ones later or make like separate videos about them, because some of them I want to talk at more length on. The first one here is from Master Prime. They have 3 questions. They said, what is your favorite marketing campaign for a game? Well, my all-time favorite trailer is actually for Dead Island 1. It's emotional. The music is fantastic. For the time, the CGI was really good, and it just feels all the feels and just had nothing to do with the game. The Division 1, I would say, is up there with its the original trailers and stuff, especially the 2013 trailer. They had such cool marketing for that. Unfortunately, another story of a game that didn't fully fulfill what we saw in the trailers and such, but it still ended up being pretty darn good. And let's see, is there one maybe more recently? The Gears of War 5. I remember its reveal at, I can't remember if it was an Xbox showcase or a E3 showcase, but they had a Billie Eilish song with one of the main characters' faces doing all this contorting and changing and stuff. And I remember that just being like a really, really, really cool intro to that game, which is a game I finally now, many years later, have started playing and have gotten pretty deep into and really enjoyed. So those are the ones I guess I'll pick off the top of my head. Second question is, what do you consider a mature game? That's an interesting question because it comes so much down to the culture you're from. I'm, if you couldn't guess, American, and we are very okay with violence and very not cool with sex and drugs and stuff like that. And so even if I personally have no issue with any of those things, that cultural thing still kind of gets implanted in your head. So to me, a mature game would be one of showing like extreme violence. Maybe like light violence isn't technically mature. I don't know. You start to get into semantics there. But definitely anything that involves like sex and stuff like that. I still do think it's interesting that like drug use and stuff is considered like mature, like a mature rating for games. And like, I get it, but it also, I don't know, it's also interesting. But especially the sex and nudity thing is really interesting because I guess if it's purely in a game for erotic reasons to be a turn on or to be, like that, then I get it, I guess. Like if you just have a character banging, like I get it. But like, inherently a breast shouldn't be mature. It's just a body part. It's just skin, is all it is. That we, have our own connotations for. So yeah, that's an interesting question, because I think if you ask people from other places, like countries in Europe, or even in South America or Central America or Africa or Asia, or all over the world, you would either get more or less conservative responses depending on where people are from and their individual personal beliefs. But yeah, that's a great question. I love it. And finally, and I like this one, Master Prime asked, a lot of questions during the years, but nobody asked, how are you doing, Bon? and I'm okay. I'm doing pretty good. I am pretty chubby these days. I need to get that figured out. I actually think I'm going to try to take some pretty drastic steps for that, not just like a diet or something. I think I may need to deal with some more issues than that to figure that whole situation out. But that's not a bad thing. The realization is the first step. But yeah, like depression wise and stuff like that, I've been pretty good. I keep a pretty positive attitude. I hope that's portrayed through my content. I'm definitely a glass half full kind of person, so you rarely see me get like depressed. Like the worst I get is when I hear a song that like really gets me down, but then that tends to like, I felt feelings and now I feel great. I'm not really one for depression. Anxiety and stuff, I'm an anxious person for sure, so maybe that's a little bit of an issue, but overall, family's good. The little one's growing up, shooting up like a weed. She's super smart and great. My wife's doing great, even though she had to have a rough day today. Maybe I'll talk about that on stream sometime. I mean, my job's good. Content's great. Things have been going good here. There's some fun games coming out and have come out recently. All the things I care about are pretty good. So no complaints. So thank you for asking. Then YouTube's, I picked one of their questions, and it says, what gameplay or creative influences do you hope contemporary games or media have on the next Mass Effect? So a big part of that would be looking back at the games I've enjoyed the most in the last 4 or 5 years. Red Dead Redemption 2 being a big one. I hope that they are inspired by that game in the sense of seeing a developer make a gigantic world that still felt dense and still felt real and lived in. I don't want the next Mass Effect to be a big giant open world game, but I still think that there's lessons to be learned, especially in the way that like side quests work and stuff like that, where maybe they're attained more organically and things like that. And character writing and stuff, obviously I love Red Dead Redemption 2, and so as much as they can take from that would be cool. I've talked a lot about how the way that the open world areas are treated in Jedi Survivor. I really hope they take inspiration from that, where basically there are multiple planets you can explore, and some of them are pretty big, but they don't prevent you from mainlining the game if you want to, but they also give you freedom to explore and find some secrets and stuff like that, but not too much. I really felt like Jedi Survivor had a very good treatment of open world, and that's definitely something I hope that they can take inspiration from. What else? I mean, we have to talk about Tears of the Kingdom, right? I obviously don't expect the next Mass Effect to be much like a Zelda game, but I think that there are lessons to be learned there in, freedom of choice, in world design and things like that, and just letting players play your game, and maybe not being super duper conservative with hand holding and such. I think that would be a lesson to learn from those. And just media in general, I think I would like to see them be willing to abuse nostalgia a little. This is kind of maybe talking about like the Star Wars and the ups and downs of those more recent movies. Acknowledge nostalgia as a very powerful tool, both for the people who will feel it and the people who you can teach them about it. but also to be really brave. I've talked a lot about how the next Mass Effect, I think, should play a lot on nostalgia, but should be willing to upset people as well, because no matter how they move that game forward, whether I'm going to like it or not, the only way for them to move that game forward, I think, in a productive way, is to be brave and to do some things that not everyone's going to love. And so maybe that's a bit of influence I would like to see. So it's a very excellent question. YouTube's had a few other questions they submitted to the forum, to the Google Forms as well. I'm actually going to try and make a video maybe out of one of them, and I can pepper those into other podcasts if I need more questions. So thank you, Master Prime and YouTube's. Like I said, there's all kinds of places to submit your own stories, topics, or questions. The big one I really want to push is that Google form. So check it out on my Twitter. I will try to remember to put it in the description of the video in the podcast. But you can find it on my Twitter, I promise. And there it is. That's it. This is one of the longer episodes we've had in a while. Thank you so much for listening. I really do appreciate it. Being a solo podcast, the main communication I have is with you. And so after this episode is finished, review it if you can. If you're on YouTube, please leave a comment. And for next week, jump into one of these options I've given to suggest a topic, a story. Give me feedback. If you just have a thought on something I can do better, I'll hear you out. I want to make this podcast bigger. It's been stagnant for a while. It's doing okay, but I want to grow our community, and any help I can get with that, I appreciate it. You can find me all over the internet as Bond Diesel, including on Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and on Twitch. That's all I have for this one. So until next time.